So the dumbest bill in America is H.R. 6515 in the United States House of Representatives by none other than Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman from Minnesota. And Ilhan Omar wants to take advantage of the pandemic by basically legally expropriating property. So we're calling this the Pandemic Expropriation Bill. She calls it the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. And so her idea is that it sounds good initially, folks, so you got to hear me out on this. Her idea with the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act, which we're calling Pandemic Expropriation, is that you don't have to pay your rent or mortgage during the pandemic, at least until the crisis is over, which, by the way, could be a year before the crisis is over, because naturally we may not be back to full employment until that time. And so it's really squishy when the crisis would be over. You wouldn't have to pay your rent or your mortgage. And in addition to that, if you were a landlord, for example, and you engaged and became part of this program, once the program was over, you would have to give 10% of your property equity to all of your tenants. In other words, she's trying to socialize property ownership. She's trying to create a socialist society so there is no property ownership in the United States, and using the pandemic to do that, which is why we're calling it pandemic expropriation. We have our first clip of her talking about this particular bill, the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act, and here is Ilhan Omar.
We know right now, really, there isn't a set timeline when we expect for Congress to be back and to take on the next relief package. We think it might happen in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And so that actually gives us an opportunity to push for this, because in 2 weeks, there's another rent that is due.
Yet, so there you have it. So she's talking about her bill and, talking it up. And of course, it really sounds good during a pandemic. And by the way, we want people to understand out there in podcast land. I know a lot of people personally who can't afford to pay their mortgages because they've been laid off, or their job has been terminated because it doesn't exist anymore, because the company has closed. I know people that can't pay their rent. It's an awful thing. She's trying to take advantage of the entire country by passing a national law to say, well, we're not going to just help you during this crisis. We're going to force common ownership of real property, common ownership. So one of the things is you have to, if you take the money and your landlord, 10% of your equity goes to the tenants. And if you take the money as a landlord and the government, you can't discriminate against source of income. And by the way, for the podcast listeners, that means that if you were in Section 8 housing as a landlord, you have to receive and accept Section 8 housing. Well, what if you don't want to? It's your property, right? So remember, it's your property, and you're being forced to say the government is my customer, because that's who's paying you. The government really is the tenant. Right? And that is forcing socialized ownership of real property, which is really a scary thing. Yeah. And get this, you also have to permanently reserve a portion of your rent restricted units for lower income households. And among other many, you have to agree to provide residence. Get this, you have to agree to provide residence in your housing units that you're renting. Doesn't matter, large, medium, small. You have to provide services such as health care, employment, education, assistance, childcare, financial literacy class, and other community-based support services. What does that have to do with being a landlord? Oof. I mean, the bill does so much. By the way, podcast listeners, I could go on and on and on about the crazy amount of this bill. So here's the problem with bills. It always sounds really good because any politician can make a bill sound wonderful on the surface until you read the fine print, which, by the way, almost no one ever does. They almost never actually read the entire bill to see what could go wrong with this. When you say to people, you don't have to pay your rent, you have to pay your mortgage. Yeah. And by the way, you're going to own part of the man's property when all this is over. Yeah,
I want to address this from my perspective from 2 points. I want to separate the bill because I think it does two things. The first part is the most on your face part. It's basically saying you don't have to pay your rent or your mortgage during this time of crisis. I think that is, again, categorically unuseful to fixing the economy. there are a lot of people whose lives, despite having to stay home every day, have not been significantly impacted. They're still getting their paychecks, they're still making the same amount of money, they still have the same amount of people
because they're still employed.
Because they're still employed.
Yes.
If you can pay your bills, pay your bills.
That group of people, well said, and I'm just going to interrupt you temporarily. That group of people, well said.
Yes.
That group of people that have been unaffected by this pandemic financially should continue to pay their bills.
Yes.
She's encouraging them not to.
Not to. Now, second, for the people who can't pay their bills, you should. I would see some sympathy here in that I think that there should be more done during this time to work with tenants and people with mortgages to kind of create a way for them to come out even, right?
It's called forbearance.
Yeah, basically you take that month and you put it at the end of the lease and you extend the terms of your mortgage release.
Yes.
I think that most mortgage agencies, I mean, I know that they're doing this for all FHA backed mortgages and rents, which is about 70%, but there's a 30% who are kind of left out on that. And I think the onus should be on those companies to step up to the plate and help people during this time. Now, that's the first half of the bill that really struck me. But the second half, where we're talking about forced collectivization of property, is absurd.
It's the beginning of forced collectivization.
It's basically my property owner, my tenant, goes out, they develop a project, they build a house, and I have the, basic exchange that I give them capital, and in exchange they let me stay in their room. But somehow this bill will basically say that because I have exchanged capital for that house, that I am now an integral part of the working, structure of this business, and so I'm entitled to capital and equity as a result. And that's where you lose me, because it just goes against all the principles of free market capitalism and economics that we've all known that has made us this great powerful economic nation. And
so look, I have to say this. I come from a generation, I'm a baby boomer, as you all know, out there in podcast land. I come from a generation where when there is a deep recession, when there is a crisis like this, and this is more deep depression, this is more depression or deep recession like, no doubt about it, this pandemic and what it's causing and wreaking havoc on people's lives. I come from a generation where when you owe rent, you go talk to the landlord.
Yeah.
The first place you go isn't to government. The first place you go is to the person with whom you have the deal and the relationship.
Yeah.
And so here's an example. So I know a ton of people who have small stores, small businesses, and they rent the building that they're in, and they own the business. So the business is in the building, they own the business, but they rent the building. And they have gone to the landlord and said, hey, look, I know I owe you this huge chunk of change for the month of March and the month of April, but is there a way we can do a workout whereby that additional rent can be deferred until at the end of the lease? And the end of the lease might be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 years down, or moving forward, can I have this? Can I
disperse this month over the course of the next 24 payments,
or months? Right? Maybe I might even need 3 months assistance. And but that workout is between you and the landlord, and a good landlord will understand that he is not going to have anyone coming in behind you.
Yeah, exactly, because that incentivizes good land ownership. People who are stewards for their tenants and helpful.
It's also people treating people
good, in a good way. Because if I see somebody who's quick to throw out their tenants at some strip mall, why would I want to be there? Why would I want to put my business in that place? Why would I want to support that 100%. Person who's greedy?
I would never go there.
No.
And by the way, I've also heard of landlords who have, and I know someone, they're very close to me, they went to the landlord and they talked to the landlord about reduction in rent, and the landlord said, nope.
So then they got
it is, you signed it, and that's the way it is. And you know what? Here's the thing. There's always payback for these type of people. I believe in karma. That individual, one day, and this person wasn't interested in getting something for nothing. They just wanted to defer it. So the United States government, the government does not belong between you and the mortgage company and you and your landlord. You need to negotiate that, because we're all adults, and good people, when they're negotiating honestly and they're doing so in a transparent way, can always come to an arrangement much faster and much more equitable than the United States government getting in between you and that other person.
Just think about all the paperwork you have to fill out, all the hoops you got to jump through, the qualifications and the regulations, and
what's really amazing too, Garrick. As you being our one millennial today, is this podcast is about communist bullies. And Ilhan Omar, I mean, she's all about socialism and communism. She's actually quite frightening. We have a clip from her last year talking to Elliot Abrams, and she's actually grilling him. And I believe it's the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Elliot Abrams is the special envoy to Venezuela. This was last year when she did this.
And during the Reagan administration and the Bush administration, the first one, he was the special envoy to a couple of different countries, which she'll mention in the clip.
So he was the special envoy to Venezuela, of course, from the Trump administration. So Ilhan Omar is grilling him. This is a year ago. This will give you a flavor of who this person is who put in this dumbest bill. We have a clip on this, and you have to listen to it to believe it. And here it is.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question.
So here she is on the side of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. So she, being Ilhan Omar, is on his side, the dictator's side, and the dictator, of course, being a socialist and a communist and allied with, of course, Cuba and others. And she's siding with him and saying, well, the United States, Mr. Abrams, is the problem, and you're the problem, sir. And meanwhile, this actual interview, if you will, during the hearing occurred right around when Maduro fixed the election.
Yes.
And it was actually defeated.
During the initial, it was basically a revolution or a civil war going on within the country with the Guaido regime.
He lost the election.
The Maduro regime.
And they wouldn't let Juan Guaido, who won the election, gain power because that's what naturally communists, socialists, and dictators do. This is the same woman that put in this bill that I call the Pandemic Expropriation Bill, H.R. 6515, which is the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act, which would open the door to socialized property ownership.
Yeah.
And getting the government involved. I want some final thoughts on this.
My final thought, I want to address the clip where she's grilling Elliot Abrams.
Please.
I think to conflate the people in Venezuela seeking a democratic country and freedom and democracy in the wake of authoritarianism and communism as her equating that to some genocidal regime is inappropriate.
Incredibly inappropriate. And if anything, she's a communist bully herself. And I believe, in my heart, believe me, I'm willing to go out there on a limb and say there's no doubt in my mind that she's a socialist and that she's a communist because she literally is on the side of all people, Nicolas Maduro, and then put in this horrible bill, which is our dumbest bill in America, H.R. 6515, Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. Good old Ilhan Omar. And that is the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, our producer, Adam Katora, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and their website. See you next time.